Hey everybody, Matt here from Avenue Record Company. Thanks for tuning in. Got another tutorial for you. Today I want to talk to you about a technique that I use all the time, mostly on drums, sometimes on other sound sources, but it's called transient shaping. And for those of you who don't know what a transient shaper or a transient designer is, it's basically a tool that you use to adjust the attack and the release or decay of a waveform. The reason I use it, a lot of times when I'm mixing a song, unless I feel like the song needs to sound compressed, I don't really like to hear compression. If I'm working on drums and I want them to have that punch and attack that a lot of compression will give them, I will use a combination of compression and then I will follow it up with transient shaping. This song is a song called Worst of the Pain. It's a slow, jazzy blues number by Ben Schenberg. He's an amazing musician. If you want to check out his music, he's all over Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, etc. So as you can see here, I've got just the drums pulled up, a little bit of parallel compression on the kick and the snare just to add a little more snap. These drums were played by Donovan Miller, who is actually in a band with Ben called Glass Bandit, and he is a phenomenal drummer and did an excellent job on this track. We'll listen to a little bit of the song, and then I'll solo the drums and go over some of the transient shaping I did.
The backyards and the barbecues, card games and old vinyl blues, road trips and the baseball games.
So as you can hear, nice, slow, bluesy tune. Got some keys, acoustic, got some great electric work from Ben. But today we're going to talk about these drums. So let me solo these drums out, and let's listen to just the drums for a second. So you can hear the drums have a lot of articulation to them, a lot of ghost notes with the brushes. So I didn't want to ruin the dynamic performance that Donnie gave us, which sounds amazing, by slamming things with compressors or gating too much or anything like that. So this seemed like a really great choice to do some transient shaping. So let me pull up the snare track and we'll just have a look at that. So as you can see, I used Neutron 3. I used it all across the drums because this is one of my favorite plugins to use for pretty much anything. But I've got this Transient Designer pulled up. I figured we'd start with the snare top track because it's kind of the least complicated as far as what I did with the Transient Shaper. The Transient Shaper in Neutron 3 allows you to do EQ-specific transient shaping. But for the top snare, I didn't really want to do that. I mostly just wanted to treat the snare as a whole. So let me solo out this top snare track, and we'll just listen to kind of before I added the transient shaper and then listen to it afterwards. So you can see it sounds really good. There's a lot of front end punch to that snare when he hits it, even though he's using brushes. But I wanted it to have just a little bit more. So what I did was I added this transient shaper. And so here it is with the transient shaper engaged. So you can tell it does get just a tiny bit louder, but it mostly just adds a nice bit of attack and presence to the very front end of those snare hits. And you can even see here in the spectrometer what the transient shaper is doing to the snare. Let's listen again. So to me, that seemed more pleasing to add more attack to that drum rather than compressing it like crazy. So that's the snare top. Here's something else I love about this plugin. Let's pull up the kick mic. I did do a little bit of EQ specific transient design. I did treat the entire kick drum with transient attack. I used the sharp curve and I added 2.5 decibels of attack to everything below what looks to be about 1.5. And then everything above 1.5, what I did was I added just a little over 6 decibels of attack, still used the sharp EQ curve. And what that did was that Gave the whole thing more presence, but it gave that top end from about 1.5 and up a little more presence than the rest of it. Let's listen to it with a transient shaper. So you can see that transient shaper really helped that kick out a lot, whereas I'd already given it some compression. I'd already given it some saturation from the exciter. I definitely did some pretty bold EQ moves. Transient shaping and adding some transient attack definitely seemed like the next logical step with that particular track. So there's one more thing I like to do with the transient shaper, and that is typically on overheads, especially like in this situation where I don't have any room mics. We actually didn't set up any room mics on purpose because we wanted to go for kind of a band in the room, jammy kind of feel. What I did just to give those overhead tracks a little bit more of a room sound to them is I added the transient shaper here. I lowered the attack pretty dramatically, gave it quite a bit more sustain, used the medium attack curve, and then I used the blend knob. I'll actually push this blend knob all the way up so you can hear what it sounds like. Once I disengage that transient shaper, it sounds like a set of overhead mics again. But with it engaged, it sounds almost like a really heavily compressed set of room mics. So what I did was I found a balance of lowering the attack and raising the sustain, and then I blended it in. Like I said, I think it was down here around 30%, give or take. So now let's listen to just these overheads. I'll mute the transient shaper, and then I'll bring it in. You can see it's almost like blending in a set of room mics with your overhead mics. So let's listen to the whole kit with all of that engaged. So that's basically it in a nutshell, how I use transient shaping. Depending on how aggressive the song is, I will adjust how aggressively I use transient shaper. As you can see with this song, it's not a super aggressive tune, so I didn't want to go overboard with making these drums sound overly processed or giving them too much attack. But you can see in most any situation, transient shaping can be a very valuable tool, especially if you don't want to slam a track with compression. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you have any questions or something you'd like to add, feel free to leave it in the comments below. I hope you have a wonderful day and happy music making.